Chapter 081 A Civil Conversation. The tavern was a bright, lively place. Not very crowded, which was why Zack and Zorian had chosen it, but there were plenty of people talking, drinking, eating and working around. Some of them gave their table a glance from time to time, but that was just idle curiosity and they went about minding their own business soon afterwards. Nobody really paid attention to them, nor to the new arrival that had joined them at their table. They didn't even realize they were in the presence of a millennia-old lich that was currently plotting to destroy the whole city. Then again, that was to be expected. Kotachichel's disguise was practically flawless. Even Zack and Zorian had been fooled until he had revealed himself, so how could a bunch of random bystanders notice something was wrong? Even now, with the lich within a hand's reach of Zorian, he was struggling to notice any obvious tells that the man in front of him was actually a working skeleton instead of a real flesh-and-blood creature. Seconds ticked by in total silence, the two sides silently staring at each other. Zorian would have liked to claim that he was furiously thinking about the implications of this sudden visit and devising the proper way to tackle it, but the truth was that he was thoroughly shocked and was having trouble formulating any kind of coherent train of thought at the moment. He could hardly believe that Kotachichel had casually walked up to them in a busy tavern and started talking to them like there was nothing wrong. What the hell was he even thinking? This was surprisingly impulsive behavior for someone who was supposed to be more than 1,000 years old. Fortunately, Zack was more adept at retaining his presence of mind in these kinds of unexpected situations. The benefit of greater experience granted to him by the literal decades he had spent in the time loop, Zorian supposed. "You look better than I would have expected you to look," Zack commented. "How so?" Kotachichel asked curiously. He made a couple of gestures at the passing waiter, ordering something for himself. Zorian wasn't sure what, but the waiter seemed to have understood him and responded with a casual nod in return. Why was a lich like Kotachichel ordering drinks, even though he doesn't need to drink? Probably for the sake of appearances, but still. Could he even drink? Was his disguise good enough to allow that? "You look surprisingly fleshy," Zack clarified, taking a sip from the massive mug of beer in front of him. "Ah, that," Kotachichel said. "Truthfully, this is how I usually look. The skeleton form is something I reserve for battles and intimidation purposes." Having spied on the lich a few times in the previous restarts, Zorian knew this wasn't quite true. Kotachichel also habitually appeared as a skeleton when interacting with the Evasan forces and other people involved in the invasion. Though perhaps he counted that under intimidation. "It's pretty bold to just approach your enemies like this," Zack commented. "Are you going to attack me in the middle of this tavern?" Kotachichel countered. "I'm seriously considering it," Zack said, his face twisted into a small frown. "No, you're not," Kotachichel said, giving them a knowing smile. "Putting aside the morality of involving all these defenseless bystanders in our dispute, starting a fight here would be just as bad for you as it would be for me. The ruling powers of this country would be just as interested in your activities as they would be in my own, probably even more so, since you two would be easier to blackmail and take control of than me." He was right, of course. The two of them had come here without disguises, in their real identities. If they were to fight the Evasan lich here, the authorities would track them down within a matter of hours, and the level of skill they would be forced to show during the fight would intrigue and alarm just about everyone involved. Once they started to look into Zack and Zorian, all sorts of interesting things would come out. Even if the two of them won the fight with Kotachichel and somehow managed to avoid any dead bystanders or property damage along the way, the restart would be effectively over. At that point they could just as well end the restart and start over. Well, the truth was that the smartest thing to do would probably be to just end the restart immediately. Having this conversation with Kotachichel was equivalent to playing with fire. Not even the ability to end the restart on a whim could perfectly guarantee their safety. Sadamir could detect when Zorian started messing with his soul marker, so Kotachichel could doubtlessly do it too. With him so close to them, and having come here prepared for anything, it was entirely possible they might not be able to activate the marker in time before he made his move. Plus, an unscrupulous, Ancient mage like him would no doubt have a whole host of subtle tricks in his arsenal, and they would possibly not even realize they were being attacked until it was too late. Despite that, Zorian had to admit he was curious. He wanted to take the risk and hear what Kotachichel had to say. This was a potential disaster, but also a potential opportunity. It was the first time they'd had the chance to engage in any kind of meaningful conversation with Kotachichel, and Zorian had a feeling this kind of thing was not an easy thing to replicate between restarts. "What you say is true, but it seems to me that you'd still be the bigger loser if we fight," Zorian said. "If your actions become known to, you could have easily made that happen by now," Kotachichel said calmly, cutting him off. "I don't know how much knowledge you have about what I'm trying to do, but I'm guessing quite a bit. You could have easily made your findings public by now, but you didn't. Instead you limited yourselves to raiding our supply caches and striking at the more careless members of our little conspiracy." Zorian frowned. He supposed this was what Kotachichel had been referring to when he said they had been interfering with his activities. However, the fact of the matter was that Zack and Zorian habitually did that kind of thing in every single restart, more in order to acquire additional funding than anything else, and it had never caused them to run afoul of Kotachichel as a result. Minor complications like that didn't usually arouse his attention. So the true reason Kotachichel had managed to find them must be located elsewhere, and Zorian could think of two main possibilities. For one thing, this was the first time they'd gone after Kotachichel directly, and maybe the ancient lich could detect that somehow. The second possibility was that Silver Lake had overestimated her ability again and tried to gather information on Kotachichel herself, with predictable results. He was leaning towards the second possibility. "So you saw we moved against your group and noticed we could have probably done even more damage if we really tried, and thought to yourself, man, I really need to have a friendly chat with those guys?" Zack asked. "Why not?" Kotachichel challenged. "We may be enemies, but so what? Enemies talk to each other all the time. Half of the world's diplomats would be out of jobs otherwise. Well, all of them, if you're a cynical old bastard like myself and see all international interactions as fundamentally hostile, but you know what I'm saying. The point is that you could have reported your findings to the authorities, but decided not to. And I could have easily gone after some of the people close to you in retaliation for the raids you've done on my allies, but chose to have this discussion with you instead." Both Zack and Zorian glared at him lightly in response to that thinly veiled threat at the end. Kotachichel pretended not to notice the look. "Anyway, what I'm saying is, we may be enemies, but we aren't irreconcilable enemies," Kotachichel concluded. "Surely we can reach some kind of agreement here?" "I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with you there," Zack said. "You want to destroy Seoria, gather the souls of everyone who dies and feed them all to wraiths, release a primordial rampage around the region and trigger another round of splinter wars. Unless you're willing to drop this whole invasion thing and go back to your island, we pretty much are irreconcilable enemies. Don't mistake our current passivity for willingness to quietly watch by the sidelines while you execute your mad schemes." "Uh-huh. So I was right, you do know quite a lot," Kotachichel said slowly, neither alarmed nor angry at Zack's statement. "However, if you'll forgive me for being a little blunt." "Why do you care?" Zack raised an eyebrow at him. "I've looked into you a bit before coming here," the ancient lich continued. "Neither of you are all that closely connected to the city itself. You are a sign of a dead house that has been taken advantage of, and Zorian is just a talented outsider attending school here. I'm really not sure why people of your caliber would waste time on basic magic classes like that, but there are all kinds of people in this world, I suppose. Personally, I'd have gone crazy in a matter of weeks if I had to impersonate a complete beginner at magic for several years, but... I'm getting a little off track. The point is, each of you is only a handful of people here that you really care about. We could easily arrange for them to be outside on the day of the invasion. Do you really care that much, in your heart of hearts, about all the random people that are going to die?" If Kotachichel had asked Zorian that at the start of the time loop, before he had largely come to terms with his place in the world, got to know all the people around him and witnessed in excruciating detail just what the invasion of Syria actually looked like. Maybe he really would have answered no in his head, like Kotachitl clearly expected him to. But now, he remembered the image of Nauchka and the other shifter children, naked and in cages, reaching out to him and screaming for help. It was closely followed by the memories of all the people who helped him in all these restarts, and who would likely die in the invasion if he did nothing to stop it, as well as all the different scenes of slaughter and looting he had witnessed over the restarts. He decided that yes, he very much did care. And he was pretty sure Zack did too. Don't you? Zorian challenged. Not really, no, Kotachitl said seriously. I come from an age where it was quite normal to round up all the mages and combat-capable men in a conquered town and mount their severed heads on pikes just outside the city walls as a warning to all who would dare defy you. I find modern sentimentality in regards to war casualties insincere, hypocritical and faintly disgusting. Ah, said Zorian with distaste. He supposed this only made sense. Kotachitl was more than a millennium old, and came from a different, more bloodthirsty time. For all that he was considered tough but fair by his own soldiers, the army he once led against the Old Alliance was famed for their brutality towards the conquered populace. It was said to be one of the main reasons his side had lost the war against Eldamar. What's with that look on your face? Kotachitl said, rolling his eyes at him. Be honest, now. If you were really such a moral and upstanding citizen, why would you go to so much trouble to hide your true level of power and all the various projects you seem to be financing? Why would you move against me on your own instead of coordinating your actions with the law enforcement and the military? Whomever you are connected to, it clearly isn't Eldamar's government. So I ask again, why do you care so much about what happens to Syria? Huh? That was interesting. It was obvious that Kotachitl had come to them mostly to fish for information rather than because he truly believed he could come to some sort of agreement with them, but up until now Zorian didn't know what exactly he was after. Now, he was starting to suspect that Kotachitl was mainly concerned with puzzling out the identity of the forces standing behind them. In reality, Zack and Zorian were rogue agents, supported by no one. But there was no way Kotachitl would think that. It would be virtually impossible for two teenagers like them to have reached the heights they did on their own, no matter how talented. Since Kotachitl had failed to find their backers when he investigated them, he could only conclude that they were very well hidden. The existence of a secret faction that he had not been aware of was doubtlessly bothering the old Lich, making him hesitate to move against them until he knew more. Zorian quickly sent a telepathic message to Zack, warning him not to let it slip that there was nobody backing them up. Kotachitl would probably not believe them even if they openly admitted their lack of support, but it was best not to push their luck like that. We already told you, you just don't want to listen, because of the many casualties that would result from your planned attack on the city, Zack said. And that's just the start of the suffering. The wars that would no doubt follow in the wake of the attack would— oh come on, you can't blame me for that, Kotachitl complained. I mean, I can understand you blaming me for the destruction of the city, but another splinter war is inevitable. Surely you understand that? This peace we have right now? It's just a short breather so the countries involved can recover from the damage the weeping did to their command structure. Well, I personally think every peace is just preparation for war, but this peace especially so. Another round of wars is going to happen soon, regardless of whether Syria is attacked or not. I'm just trying to nudge the whole thing in a direction that best suits the interests of Al-Qanabasa. Same as your own country of Eldamar and everyone else involved, really. I'm not entirely convinced that another war is inevitable, Zorian remarked. Although there was obviously a lot of truth in that, since he had heard that sentiment expressed by various people he had interacted with over the restarts. But even if that is true, there is a big difference between you and most of those countries. Their plans eventually end in something stable. You just want to keep everyone fighting forever so they cannot threaten your island. What? No, I don't. Who told you that? Kotachitl protested, actually sounding mildly incredulous. You don't? Zorian asked curiously. Truthfully, he was being deliberately provocative. He had no idea what Quetzalcoatl really wanted, but what he said just now was one of the guesses discussed by his subordinates and various members of the cult of the World Dragon. "It's a stupid idea," Quetzalcoatl said, shaking his head in exasperation. "The leaders of your nations can be remarkably stupid sometimes, but they are not that stupid. If we keep stirring shit up time and time again, sooner or later they will all decide to set aside their differences for long enough to wipe us out before getting back to killing each other." "Huh? So your actual goal is?" Zorian tried. "Heh? I guess it's not that big of a secret anyway," Quetzalcoatl said, smiling at him in a patronizing manner. "I want to mess up Eldamar and Salamnon and make Falcrinia win the war." "What? What?" Zack protested. "Falcrinia? Why them? Who else?" Quetzalcoatl asked, his tone making it clear it was a rhetorical question. "Eldamar and Salamnon would never seriously entertain peace with us. Anyone who thinks they would is either an idiot or a traitor. Falcrinia though. They are the weakest of the big three in terms of military, and their heartland is very far from Alquanabassa. If they win and subdue Eldamar and Salamnon, they will doubtlessly be quite disinterested in some fool's campaign to deal with Alquanabassa. Keeping their former enemies suppressed should take most of Falcrinia's strength. They will have little power or inclination for other major undertakings." Zorian was about to ask why he thought Salamnon would fail to take advantage of Eldamar's weakness instead when he remembered Sadamir's plan with wraith bombs. He had intended to make an example of Salamnon to prove he was serious about using his wraith bombs on defenseless towns, wasn't he? Had Quetzalcoatl given him that idea? From the man's memories, he knew that Sadamir himself did not think so, but Zorian wouldn't put it past Quetzalcoatl to have subtly led the man onto the idea without him realizing it. The conversation temporarily died down because the waiter had come to their table to deliver the drinks Quetzalcoatl had ordered. To Zorian's surprise, the Lich had ordered 3 mugs of beer to be brought to the table instead of just one for each of them. Zorian simply pushed his mug to the side and ignored it, but Zack calmly poured the contents of the new, smaller mug into the giant one already in front of him, which had been steadily getting emptier as they talked. This was no time to get drunk, Zack. As for Quetzalcoatl, he simply left his own mug untouched on the table in front of him. He didn't have so much as a sip out of it. Zorian suspected that despite looking like a flesh-and-blood person, he couldn't really drink and eat food like one. It was probably an ectoplasmic body of some sort, similar to the ones employed by the Simulacrum spell. Since nobody wanted to discuss the invasion of Ceoria and similar topics in front of the waiter, a brief silence descended upon the table. Zorian made use of it to consider their interaction with Quetzalcoatl thus far. Sadly, the only conclusion he had was that it was all very strange. He really couldn't see through the ancient Lich's plots. Zorian had been watching their adversary like a hawk, but Quetzalcoatl never tried anything underhanded or gave any indication he wanted to drug them or target them with some subtle soul magic spell or whatever. He also never got visibly angry with them, even though this conversation probably wasn't going the way he wanted it to, and even after Zorian subtly scanned the beer he had ordered to make sure it was safe. No, their interaction with Quetzalcoatl had been entirely peaceful thus far. Aside from clearly fishing for information about them and throwing in a subtle threat or two in his statements, he seemed to really want to just talk. Well, I can see this is not going anywhere, so let's put all that aside for now, Quetzalcoatl said after the waiter left and a couple of seconds passed. Instead, let me raise another issue. You have been looking into me in these past few days. Big deal, Zack scoffed. Clearly you have been looking into us, too. As a response to your own actions, yes, Quetzalcoatl said with a small smile. But you must understand. I'm not being outraged at you trying to get to know your enemy, I'm just wondering if there is more to it than that. Sure, you could have been simply looking for a personal weakness or a more effective tactic of dealing with me, but maybe you actually wanted something from me? You think we were trying to establish contact with you? Zorian asked incredulously. It happens all the time, Quetzalcoatl shrugged. People regularly come to me for help. They come to a sinister bag of old bones like you, begging for help? Zack asked incredulously. Of course, Kotachichel said with a big grin, not the least bit insulted by Zack's choice of words. I'm a millennia-old archmage. I have survived several world-shaking events, and even participated in some of them. People seek me out for all kinds of reasons. Some want lost or restricted magics that are almost impossible to get otherwise, some want to borrow my strength and expertise, and some are simply curious historians trying to get first-hand accounts of bygone eras. I usually help the latter ones for free, being a man of culture and generosity that I am, but others have to make it worth my time. Don't let that intimidate you, though. I don't deal in souls or demand people's firstborn sons or whatever you read about lakeys in all those slanderous books your government keeps shoving down your throats. I'm an honorable lich, only ruthless to my enemies, and I pride myself on my fair and honest dealing with others. I see, Zack said, tapping his finger on the table thoughtfully. He then leaned forward conspiratorially and said, as a matter of fact, we do have something we want from you. Oh, said Kotachichel, leaning forward as well. Do tell. Zack opened his mouth and then paused for a second, no doubt purely for the sake of drama. We want the crown you're wearing, he whispered in a low voice. For the first time since the meeting had begun, Kotachichel seemed genuinely surprised. Zorian didn't blame him. He was pretty shocked Zack had decided to bring that up, too. He didn't say anything, though. Hopefully his trust in his fellow time traveler wasn't misplaced and Zack actually knew what he was doing instead of simply being a little tipsy and ignoring the possible consequences. In any case, the surprise on Kotachichel's face didn't last long. He soon began laughing instead, leaning back in his chair and shaking his head. Oh, you too. I knew it was a good idea to come here, the lich eventually said, having managed to compose himself again. You're not even joking, are you? I say, sometimes I wish I could go back to being as young and brash as this. Do you even know what this crown is? Of course, Zack said. It's one of the artifacts of the first Ecosian Emperor. Good eye, Kotachichel said, giving them a thoughtful look. It's been quite a while since someone had recognized it for what it is. Most people think I'm just a megalomaniac for wearing a fancy crown all the time and leave it at that. How did you know? I thought you had never actually seen me before today, but I guess your investigation of me has been a lot more thorough than I suspected. In truth, we knew you were in the possession of one of the Imperial artifacts before we had even started investigating you, Zack said. Oh, Kotachichel asked in interest. It's because of this, said Zack, retrieving the portable palace orb from his jacket pocket. He extended the orb towards Kotachichel, letting him inspect it in detail. The old lich stared at the orb for more than 20 seconds in total silence, gazing into it with a serious face. The Imperial orb, he finally said. I thought it was lost. It was, Zack nodded, yanking the orb back and shoving it back into his pocket. And now it has been found again. So it has, Kotachichel agreed. However, I don't understand how it is related to the crown I'm wearing. Unless you're saying the orb can detect the other Imperial artifacts? That's precisely what I'm saying, Zack nodded. Well, to be more precise, the owner of any of the Imperial artifacts can detect all the others. If one can access their hidden functions, that is. What an impressive pack of lies. Not that Zorian cared too much about Zack lying to the murderous old lich in front of them, but it was kind of impressive that Zack could think up something so misleading, yet technically true. After all, the key pieces did have hidden functions, and if one could access them, then they clearly had a marker as well. Truly impressive, Kotachichel praised. I always knew there was more to the crown than I had managed to uncover, but the hidden abilities had always eluded me. I don't suppose the orb is for sale? Is your crown for sale? Zack replied, countering a question with a question. Not for all the money in the world, Kotachichel said. Well then, Zack shrugged. You have your answer, then, don't you? And yet, I feel there is a reason you showed me that orb, Kotachichel speculated. How about a trade? Zack tried. You tell us what your crown does and in return we tell you what the orb does. Very simple and innocuous, and we both get to satisfy our curiosity without having to part with our precious priceless artifacts. How about it? Very simple and innocuous, indeed, Kotachichel deadpanned. But the thing is, I already know what the orb does. It's just a particularly large pocket dimension, no? No, Zack said, shaking his head. It does more than that. It does? I see. Kotachichel said thoughtfully. I think I'm still going to refuse that offer, though. I have a feeling that I would still end as the loser in that exchange. Give me something more to work with. Say, the location of one of the other artifacts he uncovered. Sure, Zack said, agreeing with the suggestion immediately. Of course he did. At the end of the day, the very nature of the time loop made this kind of information exchange inherently biased in their favor. Everything they said to Kotachichel today, he would forget when the time loop reset itself. Shall we go first, or do you want the honor? It might as well be me, Kotachichel shrugged. He didn't seem terribly concerned about revealing such an important personal secret. It's not such a big secret, anyway. I actually use it as a form of intimidation sometimes. You see, the crown is one massive Monto battery. There was a second of silence following that statement. What? Zorian said incredulously. That's it? Just a Monto battery? Ha! Kotachichel grinned. I knew you'd react like that. It never gets old. However, when I say it's a Monto battery, I don't mean it stockpiles ambient mana like the Monto batteries modern mages make. I mean it stockpiles the personal mana of the wearer. And the mana inside it never gets unattuned. It effectively makes my maximum mana reserves 10 times larger than they naturally are. 10 times. Zorian couldn't help but blurt out. By the gods. And he thought Zack was a total mana monster. Although Zack was more reserved, one could see on his face that he was also boggling at the utterly ridiculous amount of personal mana that Kotachichel apparently had at his disposal. The ancient lich seemed very pleased by their reaction. Of course, that is without considering the divine blessing I've received in the past, which doubled my already impressive mana reserves, Kotachichel continued. Measuring of one's mana reserves was in a rather primitive state at the time I had begun my mage career, so I don't really know what sort of magnitude I would have according to the standards of modern mages, but I think I was about magnitude 25? Something along those lines, I believe. The divine blessing then doubled my maximum without hurting my shaping skills in the slightest, so my natural mana reserves were huge even before I got hold of this lovely little crown. So when I said my mana reserves are effectively 10 times their normal size due to the crown, it's actually even more impressive than it sounds. How? Interesting. Zorian shared a long look with Zack. That explanation about the divine blessing that doubled his mana reserves. Didn't that sound rather familiar? So, Kotachichel eventually said with a grin. Do you still think making an enemy out of me is a good idea? This blessing you spoke about. Zorian tried. No, Kotachichel said, raising his finger to stop him. I honored my side of the bargain. Now it's time for you to honor yours. Fine, Zack sighed. Aside from being a massive portable pocket dimension, the Imperial Orb is also a nigh-infinite memory bank, capable of storing a massive amount of personal memories and mental blueprints inside it. Kotachichel considered it for a moment. Considering the scarcity of writing supplies in those times. Yes, I can see how that kind of function would be invaluable. Not that impressive today, although the remaining records inside the orb, if any, would be incredibly valuable. To historians, if nothing else. How much did you find inside? No comment, Zack immediately said. The memory bank was completely empty, of course, as it could only be used inside a time loop, but Kotachichel didn't need to know that. Fair enough, Kotachichel conceded. As for the location of one of the other Imperial artifacts, Zack said. Well, you can find the dagger inside Eldamar's royal vault. You're already attacking the country in question, so you should have no qualms about breaking into its royal vaults as well. They have one of the imperial artifacts and they're letting it gather dust inside the treasury, Kotachichel said, shaking his head sadly. How typical. There was a brief and uncomfortable silence as both Zack and Zorian waited for the Lich to say something more, but he never did. Instead he simply observed them silently, saying nothing. So, this blessing you spoke about. Zorian tried again. It's going to cost you, Kotachichel immediately warned. Well, what do you want? Zorian asked him bluntly. Since you're asking questions about the divines, I think it would only be appropriate if you offered something divine yourself, Kotachichel smiled. Zorian thought about it for a second before pulling out the mysterious dagger they had found in the Imperial Orb and handing it to Kotachichel. Giving the ancient Lich a divine artifact of unknown powers in exchange for this kind of information would be monumentally stupid in any other circumstances, but he really wanted the proper answer to his question and the dagger would be back in his hands in the next restart anyway. Kotachichel gingerly accepted the dagger and immediately started casting spells on it, scaring Zorian quite a bit. This was the first time Kotachichel had performed any sort of magic after approaching them, and Zorian watched him like a hawk to make sure he didn't slip in something unsavory between all those divination spells he was casting at the dagger. It's a divine artifact, Kotachichel eventually concluded. Yes, Zorian confirmed. Divine for divine, no? What does it do? He asked. Zorian was pleased that not even a millennia-old Lich like him could just casually figure out divinely bestowed powers. I don't know, he admitted to the Lich. It's just something we recovered from an old ruin. So it could be totally useless or amazingly powerful, Kotachichel concluded, turning the dagger carefully in his hands and studying the lines and glyphs etched into its surface. Zorian knew he would find out nothing through that, though. They appeared to be purely decorative and said little about the dagger itself. No divine artifact is useless, Zorian insisted. You're wrong, Kotachichel said, shaking his head. Gods were very impulsive, whimsical creatures. They made all sorts of pointless items purely as a joke back in their heyday, it's just that most of them broke down or got thrown away as the years went by. Divine artifacts can break down? Zack asked curiously. Of course, Kotachichel nodded seriously. Most of the surviving divine artifacts are not unbreakable because this is some inherent trait of a divine artifact. They are unbreakable because they wouldn't have lasted for centuries if they weren't. Still, based on what you just said, the very fact this dagger lasted up until this day means it's probably at least a little bit useful, Zorian said. There is some truth to that, Kotachichel acknowledged. He looked Zorian straight in the eye. Are you sure you want to trade this, though? You could be losing a real treasure, you know? I'm sure, Zorian said firmly. Just make sure to give me an extra detailed explanation if you're so worried about taking advantage of me. Ha! Decisive. I like that, Kotachichel said. Well, since you're not afraid to take a risk, I guess it would be pretty pathetic of me to shy away from it. With a dramatic flourish, Kotachichel twirled the dagger expertly in his hand, showing impressive manual dexterity, and then pushed the dagger straight into his chest. The dagger sank into him like he was made out of water, right through the clothes, and then it was gone like it never existed. Kotachichel also looked completely unharmed by the action. He folded his hands over his chest and smiled at them. What exactly did you want to know? He asked. You said this divine blessing of yours doubled your maximum mana reserves, Zorian said. Was that a typical size of increase for such blessings? Kotachichel hummed, seemingly surprised at the question. Well, that's an interesting question, but I'm afraid I can't answer that. People with divine blessings were rare, even in times when the gods still roamed the earth, and they tended not to advertise their identity and capabilities. If you think secrecy among top mages is bad today, you don't want to know what the ancient archmages were like. So many legacies got lost because the old fools refused to let anyone see their work. But I digress. I suspect that the sort of blessing I received is relatively typical of its sort. making someone's mana reserves twice as big utterly dwarfs any sort of natural increase one can obtain through other means, thus firmly cementing the god is actually godly, but it isn't completely over the top. Plus, doubling something is a nice, simple to understand change. Do you know how it actually works? Zorian asked. In very general terms, the ancient lich said. It's a sort of stabilization frame made out of divine energy, encircling the soul. Somehow, this allows the target to store and regenerate more mana without hurting their shaping skills. Nearly undetectable through classical magic, just like all divine works, but the fact it interacts with one's soul means that skilled necromancers can eventually learn how to perceive it through soul perception. A stabilization frame? Was it perhaps in the shape of an icosahedron? Did Quatachichel design his gate stabilization frame based on the faint outline of the soul stabilization frame that encircled his soul? Zorian thought about hinting at it somehow and observing the lich's reaction before deciding that was probably going too far. Is there any way to receive such a divine blessing other than getting it from a god? Zack asked with a frown. Technically yes, Quatachichel said. The angels are said to be able to bestow such blessings to this very day. However, they are extremely stingy with them and are said to only bestow them upon their most pious and capable servants. I rather doubt they would be impressed with either of you two. So in reality, no, there really isn't any way for you to receive such a blessing. It's a privilege that only ancient monsters like me and a few fanatical dogs of the church can wield. They asked a few more questions in regards to the soul stabilization frame and how it could be detected, probably rousing some of Quatachichel's interest in the process, but eventually the old lich decided he'd had enough of their questions and turned to leave. Well, he said, rising from his seat. I enjoyed this talk and you've given me a lot to think about, but I think this is a good time to stop. Yes, Zorian agreed. It was getting tiresome constantly being on his guard around the ancient lich, making sure he didn't say the wrong thing or miss some sinister plot unfolding in the background. If you want to talk more, feel free to contact me through this, Quatachichel said, handing them a simple paper calling card, plain white and undecorated. The only thing on it was an address in Seoria, typed in bold, black letters. Zorian silently pocketed the calling card. I have a feeling we'll see each other again, soon, the old lich said with a grin, before turning around and calmly walking out of the tavern. A long silence followed in his wake, neither Zack nor Zorian saying anything for a full minute, just listening to background noise of the tavern and playing the entire encounter repeatedly in their heads. I guess the most pressing question now is, what do we do? Zorian asked. Do we do the smart thing and immediately end this ticking time bomb of a restart? Or do we play with fire and try to take advantage of this somehow? I don't know, Zack sighed, pushing away his giant mug to the side. In the end he never did manage to completely finish it, though Zorian felt that was more due to the circumstances than a literal inability to do so. It's hard to think straight about this right now. I've got so many bad experiences with that damn bag of bones. I got trashed by him so many times, got so many of my plans ruined when he just swooped in and started wrecking the place. But if you forced me to give you an answer right now? Zorian sighed. He already knew what the answer was going to be. I always did like fire, Zack said with a grin. Chapter 082 Ancient Circles. Arenhal, the unfortunate nation that had lost its airship prototype to Zack and Zorian, had been affected deeply by the theft. It was a huge blow to their prestige to lose their prized creation in such a dramatic manner, possibly more so than a mere technical failure would have been. If the design itself was flawed or the builders had assembled the vessel incorrectly and it crashed during its maiden flight, that would have been kind of embarrassing. But mostly for the project itself and the factions that supported it. Having a bunch of thieves break into the construction site and steal it away, though, that reflected badly on the whole country. It didn't help that Arenhal couldn't suppress the information that they had engaged the thieves in an airship battle and lost. The airship they had lost in the ensuing battle couldn't be simply swept under the rug, after all. Many people ended up losing their positions over this scandal, Information-gathering groups in the entire region were going crazy trying to figure out which group was responsible for the feat, and rumors were flying that a massive audit of Arenhal's government agencies and armed forces was in the works. Zack and Zorian, the causes of the entire furor, were only dimly aware of all this. They kept an eye on the news and reports coming from the region, but it didn't seem like Arenhal was getting any closer to tracking them down, so they gradually lost interest. Zorian did find it kind of interesting how many otherwise obscure groups and individuals were roused into action as a result of their theft, though. Perhaps it would be a good idea to stir up some similarly great outrage back in Altasia, just to see if something particularly interesting would show itself in its wake. That was a thought for some other time, though. At the moment, Zack and Zorian were simply relaxing on their new airship as it flew over the empty, sun-scorched desert. They weren't going anywhere in particular, they were just meandering from one random place to another, testing the ship's flight systems and enjoying the view. As an added bonus, aimlessly flying around the exotic desert was a pretty good way of foiling any attempt to eavesdrop on them. No matter what kind of exotic methods of tracking them down and spying on them Quatachichel had at his disposal, they probably couldn't reach across continents and reach them here. Wow, the view from here is amazing. And look, those four tower-like rock formations over there. Those are Ritam's Fangs, where the Prince of Ixom and the rebel Queen Hangfa swore an alliance to unite their forces and repel the Ecosian forces encroaching upon their land. Even though they failed in the end, I always thought their story of forbidden lovers fighting a doomed battle against insurmountable odds was so romantic. Zorian glanced to his side, where Nilu was leaning over the airship railing and animatedly babbling about anything that caught her eye. Bringing her along with them when they boarded the airship kind of interfered with the idea of maximum security, but Quatachichel already had plenty of people to choose from if he wanted to kidnap someone to question about Zack and Zorian, so whatever. He was more amazed that she was willing to go along with them, to be honest. A couple of acquaintances come up to you one day and tell you that they are time travelers and want you to join them for a joyride in their stolen airship, and you just accept the offer. I'm hardly an expert on ancient Ecosian history, but wasn't that alliance a matter of pure pragmatism? And didn't the Prince of Ixom have his father's permission to broker a deal with the rebels? Zorian asked curiously. What exactly makes this a case of forbidden love? Nilu gave him an unamused look. Never mind, Zorian said quickly. He didn't want to start an argument about a silly topic like that. Forbidden love it is. Nilu's expression brightened immediately, and she clapped her hands happily. We should come down and look around, she said enthusiastically. I hear nobody has been here for nearly a decade, since it's so deep in the desert now. I want to take a souvenir or two. Ooh, my sisters will be so jealous when I show them. Zorian really didn't understand her. She readily accepted their claims about the existence of the time loop, although she was indeed more wary of the story when it was both Zack and Zorian talking to her about it rather than just Zack, but the way she spoke and behaved made Zorian wonder how much she really believed them. She didn't seem to care at all about the impending end of the month that would rob her of everything she achieved here. In any case, they had no reason to refuse her request. It wasn't like they were pressed for time, or even going anywhere in particular, so stopping by for some sightseeing and to pick up some pretty rocks was okay. Besides, Zorian believed that once Nilu experienced the scorching heat of the desert outside the airship, she would quickly decide to cut their visit short. 2 hours later, he realized he may have underestimated Nilu somewhat. Being exotic native, she seemed to possess a much higher comfort threshold for hot, dry climates than Zack did. She was also far more athletic than he had given her credit for, because she was jumping about and maneuvering herself across the rock landscape with far more grace than he would have expected from a teenage girl wearing a dress. Maybe it was some kind of a bloodline. House Iljeter, like many magical houses, was rather secretive about its family magic and special abilities, but they probably had them. Hey, Zack, Zorian called out. His fellow time traveler, who was just in the process of carving Zack was here into one of the stone formations, turned to him with a questioning look. What is House Iljeter's special thing? I don't know, said Zack. Something divination-based. Neela got all apologetic when I asked and said she wasn't allowed to tell me and I didn't push. I didn't think it mattered. Something divination-based, huh? Zorian mused thoughtfully. Depending on what exactly that represented, maybe she had an actual reason for trusting them so easily. Yeah, confirmed Zack, either not realizing or not caring that Zorian was mostly talking to himself when he repeated his words. Those 3 blue circles she has imprinted on her cheeks and forehead? They are supposed to represent eyes. Oh. I was kind of wondering about that, Zorian said. You could have just asked her, Zack said, shaking his head and turning back to finish his inscription. She's a really easy person to talk to, you know? Even if you ask something she can't tell you, she probably won't get mad at you. After mulling it over for a few seconds, Zorian decided to do just that. He approached the cheery girl that joined them on this trip and waved at her to get her attention. She seemed to be in the process of trying to capture one of the small blue lizards that made their home in this place, though, and was so focused on her task that she did not notice him. The little creatures were totally harmless, but very fast after soaking in the sun for hours on end and quite tricky to catch. Neelu? He asked. She jumped a little in surprise at his sudden interruption, before refocusing on him. Her eyes, blue like the markings on her cheeks and forehead, stared at him uncomprehendingly for a second before an idea seemed to occur to her. Catch one for me, she commanded, pointing at one of the distant blue lizards with her finger. The lizard instantly reacted to her sudden move, darting so fast into a nearby crevice that it looked like it teleported. Zorian raised his eyes at her, his mouth stretching into an amused smile. Please? She added with a nervous smile of her own. Fine, Zorian sighed. After a second of consideration, he decided to go for the simplest option. He reached into the mind of the nearest lizard and manipulated it into coming over on its own. Once it approached close enough, he simply scooped it up and handed it to the girl next to him, who immediately started to coo and fawn over it. Didn't girls usually find reptiles creepy and disgusting? Look at you, so gorgeously blue and gloriously spiky, Neela said, turning the lizard over so she could see him from all sides. The lizard looked decidedly unamused with her manhandling, and would have started biting her fingers by now had Zorian not been constantly calming it down. Neela gave him a curious look. How did you do that? Mind magic, he answered honestly. Using mind magic against animals was not illegal, and didn't typically scare people. Oh. That's kind of cheating, she frowned. She stared at the little lizard in her hand for a few seconds before sighing dramatically. I kind of want to keep it, but... No, that would be wrong. I don't have anywhere to keep it, I don't know what it eats, and it would probably be lonely without its fellows. She lowered the lizard back to the ground and Zorian released his mental hold on it. Surprisingly, the little lizard didn't immediately run away after that. Instead, it opted to give them confused looks and it shuffled in place uncertainly. Go along, little guy, you can go home now, Neela said. Don't forget me, okay? The lizard blinked at her in confusion, probably wondering why the big creature didn't eat it when it had the chance, before turning around and darting away into the distance. Sorry about that. I get a little weird sometimes, Neela said, turning back towards him. I guess you wanted to tell me something. Is it time to leave? No, I was actually just going to ask you about something, Zorian said. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I'm kind of curious. How come you accepted our story so easily? Shouldn't you already know the answer for this? She said curiously. You're the ancient time traveler who has seen it all, right? I'm not that ancient, actually, Zorian said, shaking his head. I spent about 7 years in this time loop, not counting the time dilation rooms. Time dilation rooms? Neelu asked curiously. What are those? It's a long story. Ask me some other time, okay? Zorian said. The point is that I have not seen it all, not even close. Truthfully, this is the first time I've had any significant interaction with you. Boo. Am I so boring? She pouted. Not at all, Zorian said hastily. It's fine, said laughed. I'm just teasing. Well, mostly. You say I accepted your story really easily, so that means you tried to convince many other people thus far. Depending on how far down the list I am, I might actually be offended. It was mostly Zach who tried to convince all our classmates and anyone who would listen, so that statement is based mostly around what he told me of his experiences, Zorian said. He said most people reacted really badly to his claim of being trapped in an ever-repeating month. Especially in the beginning, before he honed his skills to downright implausible levels and memorized which secret and prediction this or that person found convincing. You always accepted his story very easily. Even in this restart, where we stole an airship and both of us approached you instead of just Zach, why would it matter that you both approached me about this? Nilu asked with a frown. Zorian fumbled. Oh, I get it, Nilu giggled. I guess I can see it, he can be kind of cute. She suddenly stopped and gave Zorian a panicked look. I mean, not that you're not, but you're a bit too quiet and passive for my taste in gods. I should have just pretended to be scandalized about this, shouldn't I? Okay, shutting up now. You still haven't answered my question, Zorian pointed out, amused. What? Oh, about me being easy to convince. Nilu said, giving him a short, nervous laugh. Right, I don't really have an answer to that. I guess you're expecting some big mystery here, but there isn't any. I'm just kind of foolish, I guess. We know each other, I could tell that you had no malicious intentions towards me and you provided all the proof I asked of you. Even if you were delusional or lying, I probably wouldn't have been in any harm. Zorian gave her a speculative look. The way she phrased her statement gave the impression she trusted a mere hunch about their good character to keep her safe, but the surety in her voice made Zorian think there was something a lot more concrete involved there. Perhaps something divination-based? And if I asked you how you were so sure we had no malicious intentions towards you? He asked curiously. Woman's intuition, she said cheerfully, her voice sounding like she had been just waiting for a chance to use that response. Well, regardless of the reason, I thank you for your trust, Zorian said. No problem. Nilu said, giving him an appreciative look for not pushing her on the issue. Was there anything else you wanted to ask? Yes, actually, Zorian said. This may be too personal, but why did a girl from Xlotic decide to go all the way to Seoria to attend a magic academy? It's a somewhat curious thing to do, you know? Ah. Nilu sighed, her good mood suddenly deflating somewhat. But only somewhat. Well, my mother is actually from Eldamar. She used to tell me stories of her homeland when I was little, and I always wanted to visit the place. So I begged my father to let me come and he couldn't say no to me. That's the reason I usually tell people when they ask me that question. And, I mean, it's kind of true. I really did want to visit. And Seoria is really interesting and I'm not really sorry for being there. But, Zorian prompted. But if it was for that, I probably wouldn't have gone so far as to sign up for school here, Nilu said. I would have simply visited for a few months. The truth is my father has made some pretty serious enemies back in Nelantur, and there were concerns they would go after his family to get to him. Especially after me, because, father doesn't really trust my judgment much. How? Very surprising. Then again, most people would say that Zorian's parents were in the right and that Zorian was being unreasonable when he clashed with them, so maybe he should be more open-minded about Nilu's reasons for acting the way she did. In the end, it was decided I would be sent to Eldamar, Nilu continued. That way I would be out of danger, I get to fulfill my long-time wish to visit my mother's homeland, and the whole thing can be explained back home as my father spoiling his daughter a little too much. 3 birds with 1 stone, no? Indeed, Zorian agreed. Though he personally found it sad that Nilu's father sent his daughter to Seoria to keep her safe, only to have the city invaded by Ebisons in the end. That didn't exactly go according to plan. Anyway, I actually think the whole thing turned out really well in the end, so I have no regrets. You don't have to feel sorry about me, Neela said. Though to be honest, I'll probably be glad when I'm done with the academy and can come back home. I kind of miss my family. You probably don't understand, being able to see yours anytime you want and all. Yeah. You're probably right about that, Zorian said slowly. He didn't bother clarifying that it was not quite for the reasons she was thinking of. They wandered the rocky landscape for a while after that, after which all three of them returned to the airship and continued their aimless wandering through the desert. Neela somehow talked him into helping her take away a large green rock from the site, even though it was pretty much worthless as far as Zorian could tell, and he couldn't possibly fathom what she intended to do with it, and she was inordinately happy about that. She spent about half an hour humming to herself and inspecting the rock in great detail before eventually seeking him out again. "Zorian, can't I ask you something?" she asked him, then immediately continued with her follow-up question without waiting for his answer. "This time loop of yours. It's going to end someday, right?" "Yes," Zorian said, unsure what she was getting at. "So one day, this month will run its course as it always does. And I will live on and remember instead of endlessly forgetting?" she prompted further. "And you will remember this day and act accordingly?" That's the idea," Zorian said, faltering slightly. They never told her that there was a good chance they would be destroyed in the end, having failed to leave the time loop before it collapsed. He didn't really want to tell her about that if he didn't have to, either. "What do you intend to do when that happens?" she asked, biting her lip. "About me, I mean." "About you?" Zorian asked, caught a little off guard by the direction this was going in. "Well, it depends on what you want us to do, I guess." "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I just know I had fun today and I don't want to forget it all." And here he thought the realization she would lose everything at the end of the month hadn't affected her in the slightest. Maybe the implications of the time loop just hadn't hit her up until now? Unfortunately, there was very little he could do to comfort her in regards to that. Aside from lying, of course. "But," she continued, "since that is not possible, I have a somewhat selfish request out of you and Zach. When we meet again at the end, don't pretend this never happened. You don't have to tell me about the time loop, but don't be a stranger. I know I'm probably not the most exciting person you've met over the years, but you're not allowed to forget me, okay?" Zorian gave her a strange look. "Well, okay," he said slowly. "Yay, new friends," she exclaimed, causing Zorian to sigh a little. She really reminded him of a little kid in some respects. Or novelty. He really missed that silly little spider sometimes. "I hope you realize we won't be stealing this airship in the final version of this month," Zorian said. "So this particular memory is probably never going to be recreated." Neela seemed to give it a serious thought. "That's probably for the best," she eventually decided. "From what the papers are saying, you killed a lot of people when you destroyed the pursuing airship. That wasn't very nice." "I really don't understand you," Zorian admitted, shaking his head. "You know that, but you're still here. And you want to be friends with us. All those people will be alive when time resets again, so it's fine," Neela said with small shrug. "But hey, even without the airship, you can still open doors between continents, no? That's how we reached your airship in the first place. So you can take me to see all these places anyway." Zorian opened his mouth to point out that revealing they could perform intercontinental travel spells was still a huge deal, but in the end he just shut his mouth and remained quiet. Considering Neela's peculiar personality, she was probably one of the few people who could handle such a revelation without totally freaking out. "I guess you're right," he eventually conceded. Besides, what was incredible cosmic power for if not for taking a girl out on a casual vacation into an uninhabited desert filled with crumbling ruins and bloodthirsty monsters? Maybe Zach was becoming a bad influence on him. In the end, it was not hard at all to talk Neela into helping them find the translators and contacts they needed to operate more freely in the Xlotic region. Most of these were going to be in her home country of Nelantur, since that was where she could wield her family influence the most and where her knowledge of local knowledge and customs was most pronounced, but that was still plenty useful. With such a solid starting point, it wouldn't be hard to extend their net wider throughout the region. They ended up dropping her off in Nellenter with a pair of simulacrums while they returned back on the airship to discuss something else. Namely, the Quitachichil situation. It's been a few days now, Zorian said. We've both had time to calm down and think about it. Do you still think we should take a risk and try to broker some kind of deal with Quitachichil? Well, yeah, Zack said. I mean, what's not to like? It would be trivially simple to give him divine artifacts, or even pieces of the key like the Imperial Orb, in exchange for rare magic and knowledge. Then we can do it again in the subsequent restart with him none the wiser. I feel a dark spark of joy at the very thought of such a scenario. If there is anyone that I don't feel the slightest bit guilty doing that to, it's him. I'm not sure how far we can take that, though, Zorian said nervously. He's bound to notice something is wrong at some point. Especially if we trade for magical instructions. If Xvim and Alanik could notice when we were displaying their own techniques, Quitachichil can surely do the same. And I'm fairly sure he would react far more violently to the idea of someone stealing his secrets. It doesn't matter, Zack said, shaking his head. It just means we have to be smart about this. We ask him about pocket dimensions in one restart, then about soul magic in the next, then about dimensional gates and so forth. We try our best to get the most we can out of each interaction, and only when we have exhausted a full list of topics do we consider revisiting some of them. If we are pursuing a different topic each time, he shouldn't be able to notice anything is wrong. Yes, I've considered that idea too, Zorian mused. But that rests on the idea that the Lich is actually trustworthy. He did come to talk to us instead of simply trying to assassinate us or kidnapping people we hang around with to blackmail us, Zack pointed out. It's hard to tell how much of that is his real attitude and how much he was simply afraid of rousing some kind of sleeping dragon, though, Zorian pointed out. He clearly thinks there is some kind of secret force supporting us. If he knew we were on our own, I have a feeling he would have been much more domineering. Well, that problem has an obvious answer, at least, Zack laughed. We just need to make sure he never finds out. Zorian supposed he was right about that. It didn't make Zorian feel any better about the idea, though. Reaching into his pocket, Zorian retrieved a piece of paper and unfolded it. It held a simple address in Seoria, transcribed from the calling card that Quitachichil had given them. He had thrown the original into a public trash can an age ago, of course. Even though it looked perfectly normal and he couldn't actually find anything wrong with it, it was better to be safe than sorry. What are you thinking of? Zack asked after a few seconds. I'm just wondering how much of Quitachichil's attitude that day was real and how much of it was a carefully crafted mask, Zorian said. He did come there in what was effectively an ectoplasmic disguise and maintained perfect control over his soul throughout the entire meeting. For all we know, every word and expression could have been carefully calculated to leave a specific impression. I don't think so, Zack immediately said, shaking his head. I did have short interactions with him from time to time in various restarts, you know. None as extensive as the one that day, but it adds up. And the Quitachichil we met that day was very much like what I remember of him in the past. He had that same uncaring, informal manner of speech that looks so out of place on a terrifying old-as-dirt lich, and the casual way he threatened us, more like he was stating facts than trying to be menacing. It sounded very much like what I was used to. No doubt there was some level of deception and social manipulation going there, but I don't think he was faking most of it. Like that move with the dagger near the end of the meeting, plunging an unknown divine artifact into his ectoplasmic form may have been intended to send us some kind of message, though I struggle to figure out what it was, but more likely than not it was just him having a bit of a theatrical streak. I did get the impression that he likes to brag, yeah, Zorian agreed thoughtfully. He seemed to delight in drawing attention to his abilities, great age and other advantages. Like his insane mana reserves, for instance. Ugh, don't remind me, Zack grumbled. I guess now I know how people felt about me all this time. But yeah, I think he's pretty much what he advertises himself as, an old, incredibly powerful lich with little concern about appearing humble or dignified. I think it's partly because of his great age. I read once that, contrary to what most people think, ancient peoples tended to be a lot more rude and forthright than modern ones. A lot of immortals throughout history found it hard to keep up with changing social mores. For instance, not that long ago people had very little concept of privacy and thought nothing of having sex in the same room as their children. Public torture and executions were considered to be almost akin to a free entertainment show you could visit rather than something horrifying. And you heard yourself what Quetzalcoatl thought about the proper treatment of conquered populace. In all likelihood, the way Quetzalcoatl behaves is a sort of compromise between what he feels is reasonable based on the ancient environment he was raised in and what he thinks he can get away with in the modern era. That was an interesting point. Zorian couldn't help but remember that one time he decided to describe the process of butchering animals to some of his classmates in Seoria who had never been outside the city. He was surprised and amused when he realized how horrified they were at his description of how the animals were killed and processed. It seemed so silly and hypocritical to him, since he was pretty sure they ate meat just fine and would continue to do so in the future. And that was between people belonging to the same general age and culture. Quetzalcoatl probably experienced this sort of thing magnified 100-fold. Perhaps when Zack and Zorian told him about how wrong it was to kill all these people in Seoria, he thought of them the same way Zorian did about those squeamish kids that couldn't handle how their meals were prepared behind the scenes. You know surprisingly much about the topic, Zorian pointed. Back when I didn't know when this time loop was going to end, I looked around for any information I thought might be applicable to my situation, Zack shrugged. I was kind of going crazy from the endless repetitions, and I thought maybe the books about immortals and their ilk would be of help. Unfortunately, it turned out our situations weren't very comparable. It turns out most ageless people think the world is changing too much and too fast for their tastes, not that everything is too cyclical or boring or whatever. I see, Zorian said, leaning back. So, just so we're clear, we're really doing this? I think we should. Zack confirmed. It's dangerous, yeah, but the gains would be so very sweet. Doubly so because we're effectively stealing knowledge from that bag of old bones. The situation in this restart is not very good for what we talked about, though, Zorian pointed out. The restart is more than halfway done by this point. If we are going to try and get the most out of any individual topic within the span of a single restart, we should wait for the next one to start. I don't think it would be wise to just ignore Quetzalcoatl in this restart, though, Zack frowned. He will probably decide to move against us if he thinks he cannot turn us to his side somehow. Yes, but I had another idea about that, Zorian said. What if we recruited his help in breaking into the Eldamar's royal vault? Zack gave him a surprised look. That's a pretty interesting idea, but how would we possibly divide the spoils? Zack asked. I mean, both sides will want to claim the dagger in the end. Well, no doubt Quetzalcoatl will try to betray us in the end in order to claim the dagger for himself, Zorian said. But that's fine, because we want to fight him in the end, Zack surmised. Yes, Zorian confirmed. After all, how else can we get a hold of his crown? He just wondered how they were going to explain all this to Alanik. If he hated the idea of them raiding Eldamar's royal vaults and working with Silver Lake, he was going to be positively thrilled with their latest idea. Break. After a considerable amount of preparations, it was time for Zack and Zorian to assault the Ziggurat of the Sun and try to claim the Imperial Ring that was supposed to reside somewhere inside. Their forces for the task were relatively modest. Aside from 2 of them and their simulacrums, they also had Alanik, about 20 mercenary mages from the Xlotic region and a small army of golems that Zorian had made specifically for the occasion. They did not choose to arrive in the Pearl of Arenhal. The airship was ill-suited to fight masses of flying opponents like Seldar Thumb, and it would get immediately recognized for what it was by the mercenaries, which would cause all sort of issues down the line. They had enough trouble convincing these people to cooperate with them in this seemingly crazy operation as it was. Instead, they brought the whole group to their destination, a Solrothum outpost not far from the ziggurat that Zorian's simulacrum had secretly infiltrated and taken over a few hours earlier, through the usage of dimensional gates. The display of such high-level magic did much to quell the mercenaries' concerns, which was a nice side effect that neither Zack nor Zorian had really counted on. They would have to remember in the future that implausible displays of magic did not just alarm people, but could sometimes actually set them at ease. After organizing themselves a little, the entire group was split into two. The first one, composed out of all of the mercenaries, most of the golems and one simulacrum of Zack and Zorian each, was ordered to march out of the Solrothum outpost and launch an obvious, frontal assault on the structure. This was, of course, little more than a distraction. But a distraction that the Solrothum probably wouldn't be able to ignore. According to the military personnel and Solrothum experts Zack and Zorian had talked to in the past few days, humans usually dealt with Solrothum strongholds by bombarding them through artillery magic from extreme range. Unfortunately, neither Zack nor Zorian were all that proficient with artillery magic. It was a magical discipline designed for sieges and outright warfare, and typically involved titanic amounts of mana being shaped by multiple mages acting in concert with one another. Zack knew a bit about it, since his monstrous mana reserves allowed him to cast some simple ones all by himself if he really needed to, but Zorian only had a theoretical grasp of the field. Fortunately, the 20 mercenaries they hired were proficient with artillery spells and had experience in anti-Solrothum tactics to boot. The Devil Wasps had no choice but to come out of their base and confront them. Even if they suspected the attack was a distraction, they had to assign at least some of their forces to disrupt the bombardment. After a few minutes, 3 more pairs of simulacrums, each group holding a Zack and a Zorian, departed from the outpost under a magical cloak. Their job was to find their way into the ziggurat and find where the Imperial Ring was located. Meanwhile, the original Zack and Zorian, Alanik and the 2 most powerful golems patiently waited for their moment. Break. Simulacrum number 1 nervously watched the cloud of giant black wasps on the horizon. It was his job, as well as the job of Zack's simulacrum and the many golems the original made for this day, to defend the artillery mages from being harassed by the Solrothum so they could work in peace. In general, their whole group was supposed to make itself as threatening as possible so the Solrothum would have to send the majority of their forces out of the ziggurat, thus leaving it open and easily infiltrated by the simulacrum teams. He was fine with that. However, how was he supposed to do that when the damned devil wasps refused to attack and just kept flying back and forth out of their attack range? What the hell are they doing? The simulacrum asked the Zack simulacrum beside him. They can clearly see that we're setting up an artillery magic position here. Do they think we're bluffing or something? No, I think they're waiting for something, Zack simulacrum said. An order from their leaders, maybe. I think. A loud roar resounded in the distance and a huge serpentine form erupted out of the sound, directly beneath the area the Solrothum swarm was flying at. No, not serpentine. Worm-like. A huge brown sandworm raised its head towards the sky, its toothy maw unfolded like a hellish, fleshy flower. As for the devil wasps, they seemed to be cheering. Damn it, they managed to tame a fully grown sandworm. The leader of the mercenaries whined. That's going to be a nightmare to fight. Simulacrum number 1 had to agree. Although he could easily detect incoming sandworm attacks due to his mind sense, it was hard to deal with attacks that came from underground. Especially since the sandworm was huge, meaning they had little chance of stopping its attacks and could only move out of the way whenever they detected it coming. I have an idea, Zack simulacrum said, quickly performing an alteration spell that hardened the sand beneath them into a stone platform and then raising it high into the sky. There, Zack simulacrum said, smiling. It's a bit expensive to maintain, but now the stupid thing can no longer reach us. For all their huge size, sandworms are useless against things that can fly. He had barely finished speaking when the sandworm suddenly shook, almost like a dog trying to dry itself off, and a series of translucent, Glowing, yellow wings grew out of its sides. They were long and paper-thin, reminiscent of dragonfly wings, and looked comically inappropriate for lifting a creature like that into the air. But as the creature's many golden wings started slowly undulating like oars on a boat, the sandworm slowly lifted itself into the sky and then reoriented itself towards them. Zack's simulacrum immediately deflated. "Now this just isn't fair," he complained. Simulacrum number 1 looked at the flying sandworm, which was currently flying towards them while accompanied by a swarm of devil wasps, and decided he couldn't agree more. Break. Zorian stood in the ruins of the Salrotham outpost they arrived in, observing the state of the battle. In the distance, Zack's simulacrum was desperately trying to keep the giant, flying sandworm busy, while Zorian's own simulacrum protected the mercenaries from the Salrotham swarm. Curiously, when Zorian's simulacrum tried to influence the sandworm's mind, he found it completely impossible to infiltrate. Usually he could at least make some headway when making such an attempt, even if the creature was heavily magic-resistant, but the sandworm's consciousness seemed to be protected by a mental equivalent of a stone wall, incredibly solid and unyielding. That was probably worth checking out in more detail in future restarts. In truth, he thought that part of the battle was going really well. Yes, the mercenary group failed to get off all but one artillery spell and was constantly getting pushed back, but it served its job as a distraction marvelously. The Salrotham even sent another swarm of warriors at them at one point, trying to take them out sooner, which caused Simulacrum number 1 to rant expletives at him over their soul link for a full minute or so, but was pretty convenient for the plan as a whole. No, the problem was that the Simulacrum pairs sent to infiltrate the ziggurat weren't doing so well. Somehow the Salrotham discovered all three of them the moment they got close enough to the main structure, which probably meant there was some kind of subtle alarm ward protecting it. One of the teams then died trying to charge the front entrance, the other sacrificed itself to provide the third one a chance to punch a new entrance through one of the outer walls of the ziggurat, and the third one managed to get inside but was currently blocked in one of the corridors and would likely get swarmed by the defenders soon. On top of that, the Salrotham figured out where the original forces first appeared and decided to send a group of warriors to check it out. That was how the outpost ended up in its current, ruined state. Although we haven't found the ring yet, it's now or never. I'm commanding the simulacrum that managed to get inside to open a gate for us. We're going in. Understood, Alanik said solemnly. Finally, Zack said, cracking his knuckles. Zorian took a deep breath and waited, tapping into the soul link he had with his simulacrums and paying close attention to his simulacrum inside the ziggurat. Opening a dimensional gate was a lengthy process requiring a lot of concentration, which meant it took some time and effort for the simulacrum to find himself in the position where he was able to do so. Finally, after using up all 15 of his remaining grenades in one massive attack and having Zack's simulacrum charge forward and sacrifice itself to get him some space, the simulacrum managed to successfully open a dimensional passage between itself and the original. Zorian sent his two remaining golems through the dimensional gate to clear the way, and then he, Zack and Alanik all rushed inside. There, they found a mangled artificial body of Zorian's simulacrum that ended up sacrificing his fleeting life to finish the spell in time. Rather than interrupt the gate-opening spell and save himself, the simulacrum chose to ignore the incoming attack from one of the Salrotham warriors and kept casting the spell to the very end. Curiously, now that the two battle golems Zorian sent as a vanguard had cleared the entire corridor, there were no more Salrotham coming. That final grenade attack and the arrival of a new batch of invaders seemed to have caused them to temporarily withdraw and regroup. "Let's go," Zorian said, pointing towards the corridor on the left. "Any particular reason to go in that direction?" Zack asked. "I mean, that seems to be the place where most of the devil wasps are coming from." "Yeah, it is," Zorian admitted. "I don't know where the ring is, but I'm operating under the idea that our luck is horrible and thus our target is obviously in the most dangerous part of the ziggurat." "Oh," Zack said. "Yeah, that does make sense." Zorian turned to Alanik working next to them, who was ignoring their banter in favor of scanning the walls for some reason. "Probably looking for some clues as to where they are," All of the walls still retained detailed carvings of various religious scenes. Most of them were from the Kojin era, but some of them had been crudely repurposed by the Salratham, who did their best to modify the carvings into something that fitted better with their own religious beliefs. Alanik was very unamused by their efforts, if his deepening frown was of any indication. "Alanik, we're going to have to rely on you. Zack and I have been using our simulacrums to fight for a while now, and we need some time to recover our mana reserves a little," Zorian told him. "Do you think you can?" Two Salratham warriors suddenly charged out of the corner in front of them, both of them carrying spears and decorations that looked far fancier and better constructed than what they had encountered thus far. They were probably elite warriors of the colony, and they screeched out a challenge and charged at them the moment they saw them. Alanik's expression didn't change in the slightest. He simply waved his battle staff lightly and two tiny, highly compressed balls of fire flew forwards at incredible speeds. They impacted the warriors' faces, burning a hole straight through them, and the two Salratham died on the spot. "Don't worry," Alanik said. "Leave it all to me." He had barely finished speaking when a literal horde of Salratham converged all of a sudden. The entire corridor erupted into burning flames. Break. After much bitter fighting and several temporary retreats, the group finally managed to achieve its goal. One of the battle golems was rendered inert, the other was missing one of its arms and had 3 spears sticking out of it and slowing it down. Alanik had received a nasty-looking wound across his chest and Zack was almost out of mana. But they had found it. They had found the Imperial Ring. Unfortunately, they found it because the person wearing it decided to come to them. Apparently they caused such a commotion that the Salratham High Priest decided to confront them personally, accompanied by his highly trained, well-equipped honor guard. He was a particularly large Salratham, equipped with menacing-looking bone armor and holding what was unmistakably a spell staff. He was clearly Image, and if the low-level magical aura he was emanating was of any indication, probably a soul mage to boot. He was also decorated with an absolutely ridiculous amount of little trinkets and various jewelry, one of which was the Imperial Ring that he had on one of his hands. If Zorian didn't have the marker's function to detect pieces of the key, he would have never spotted it among all that junk the High Priest was wearing. They couldn't fight him. Maybe when they were in their top form, but not now. However, Zorian just couldn't bring himself to flee without at least trying to pull off one last thing. He summoned most of his remaining mana and launched a massive mental attack on the High Priest. Just for a moment, he smashed aside his mental defenses, suppressed his will and forced him to perform one simple action. In one smooth movement, the High Priest ripped the Imperial Ring off his finger and threw it at Zorian, who immediately caught it in his free hand. Then the effect was broken and the Salratham High Priest looked dumbfounded at what he had just done. "Zack, get us out of here now," Zorian urged him. Just before they teleported away, leaving their poor damaged battle golem behind as a distraction, they heard a shrill, outraged scream from the High Priest at the unfairness of it all. Zorian nodded sagely in his heart. Yes, sometimes the world really was extremely unfair. Tope continued,